you calculate that risk and then you make the leap. I just think that's such a good lesson for people to learn. And I literally am taking the leap every day.
Hi, up there in the sky. Hello. Well, welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, founder and podcast producer at Max Podcasting. And you can email me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode 238, and we have a 230 crazy 8 one for you. Today's guest is Luke Aikins. Luke is a skydiver who is boundary pushing, record breaking, the limit pushing. He has skydived over 20,000 times, including one time without a parachute where he landed in a net after skydiving from 25,000 feet. He has also consulted on the Red Bull Stratos jump from the stratosphere. He has been featured in the Iron Man film franchise, and he is a member of the Red Bull Air Force. This is one of the most fascinating and just crazy conversations I've ever had. And in this episode, we talk Luke's skydiving roots, which kind of rhymes, just count it, the behind the scenes of some of his most historic dives, and fascinating and laugh creating, can't think of a better adjective for adverb, whatever that is, for that, questions from wild listeners. So thank you for submitting those. It is Sweet Luke. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with the Daredevil, the Skywalker, the professional skydiver. There's lots of names for this particular guest, but I like to call him Luke. Luke, thank you so much for joining. Just so super excited to talk to you today. How you doing today?
Thanks, man. I'm stoked to be here. Actually, I haven't done one of these in quite a while. The last year I've been kind of silent. So it's really excited to talk with you guys and share what we're up to.
Oh, of course. Well, that means a lot that you're breaking out of the cone of silence for this interview. So super excited to dive into all sorts of things skydiving and in your professional career. But before that, like many of us, there was some point in your life as a kid, I would guess, that you had never gone skydiving before. Can you take us back through your first time actually jumping out of a plane and what was going through your mind there?
Yeah, I mean, I was able to make my first skydive. I did a tandem jump when I was 12 years old, back when the rules were a little more loosey-goosey. I got to make a tandem jump. My dad flew the plane, and a guy took me up, and we did a tandem skydive. And that was pretty fun, but you're kind of just along for the ride. It was really cool to experience. But the first time I actually got to jump by myself, I was 16, climb out on the wing, and you let go, and a static line pulls the parachute open for you. And my first jump really is a lot of a blur until the parachute opens. I mean, there's a lot going on. You're out there clinging on, you're 3,000 feet in the air, and you step off the side of the plane, and your parachute opens up, and then it's quiet. And I remember a lot of the parachute ride, but really my second skydive by myself was probably the most fun skydive I've ever done. You were a little more aware, your eyes opened up, and you got to really realize that, hey, you just jumped out of a plane. You also weren't scared. You know, you're pretty sure you're going to live and everything's going to be all right. But my second jump is the one I remember the most.
How would you characterize the difference between doing tandem jumps and like your first time actually jumping solo?
I think tandem jumping is an incredible way to bring someone who doesn't know that this is something they want to do. You know, they just want to experience it, right? You get strapped to a super experienced licensed skydiver who's got thousands of jumps and they've been training to do this. And you're basically along for a ride. You get to experience what the free fall feels like. You get to experience the parachute ride, but you're kind of along for the ride. You really, you know, unless you do some crazy things like grab a hold of your instructor or something like that, unless you do that, everything's going to be just fine. And then we go out and you jump by yourself, whether it's accelerated free fall or you step out there on yourself, it's all dependent on you. You know, it's that commitment. Before there's almost somebody essentially pushing you out. They say ready, set, go, and you don't have much of a vote in that, right? But when you're doing it by yourself, you have to be the one to let go of the plane and do the thing. And I would say that's the biggest difference is the commitment is fully in your hands at the moment when you jump by yourself.
Oh man, I have chills or heebie-jeebies, however you want to call it. I can already tell this interview is gonna hopefully excite people, but also give people some goosebumps.
People ask me that all the time. And when you said the heebie jeebies or scared, whatever it is, I always say that scared and excited are right next to each other. They're friends. You gotta like, I never say that I'm scared, but I say I'm excited a lot, and they're almost the same thing.
Definitely, I think it depends on the person. They're either best friends or mortal enemies, but they're certainly living on the same block. I know your family had some sort of a background in skydiving. Can you put that into words, like just how deep your family skydiving roots go?
Yeah, I mean the Reader's Digest version is my grandpa started a family business. I'm a third generation skydiver. My grandpa was a pilot in the war, got shot down in his P-47, tried to open up the cockpit to jump out back over Germany there. Ended up landing in Allied territory, had to belly it in because he couldn't get the cockpit opened up. Always wondered what it would have been like that day to jump out. What would it have been like? And came home, and him and a buddy went to a skydiving club in the 60s. And in the 60s, the most experienced skydiver at a skydiving club was an ex-military guy with 6 or 7 jumps. They went out, he did it, he fell in love with it, and they ended up making their own club. And him and his buddy kind of took it into that. And then my aunt and uncle took it over and turned that club where everyone's sharing expenses. They actually made it into a business. And now I'm a third generation skydiver with a 11-year-old son who may be fourth. We'll see.
Well, and I know part of your morning routine is, jumping out of a cockpit of a fighter pilot. So you got that down now too. But that's so cool. Your family goes back to that. So third generation skydiving. That's a hell of a family tradition. What was it like for you growing up, like with that, just being surrounded by skydivers? Like what sort of impact and inspiration did that shed off onto you?
It's pretty interesting. So as a kid growing up around, I have pictures of me 4 months old on a packing table where they used to pack the old round parachutes, So I've literally been around it since I was born. You get exposed to a lot of things, good and bad, when you're a little kid around a bunch of hippie skydivers back in the 70s. But you get to see a lot of life. You get to experience what's going on. And for me, it was just something we did. It was a normal thing. Some people's dads take them out and they go hunting or fishing or, shooting hoops. I went to the drop zone and watched my dad skydive and had him drop my G.I. Joe parachute guy when he was coming down. And it was always been a part of my life. So for me, I wasn't necessarily scared or nervous when I got to do it. I was excited to finally, it wasn't like if I was going to jump, it was when I was going to jump. My mom was very nervous about it. My mom made about 40 skydives while she was pregnant with me. And then after I was born, she hasn't made another jump. She made one tandem jump with me a couple years ago. So I literally been doing it since before I was born.
Oh my God. Wait, 40, 40 jumps while pregnant. So she averaged once a week, or probably maybe it's a little bit batched towards the beginning.
Yeah, I think when she got farther along, obviously didn't continue, but she made a lot of jumps when she was pregnant in the beginning with me. Maybe that's what's wrong with me. Who knows?
At some point, you decided to become a professional skydiver. What was that inflection point for you?
I honestly think it's like you when I was a kid, you obviously dreamed that, man, I wish I could do that for a living, but it wasn't really possible when I was younger. So I owned a construction company with bulldozers and dump trucks and backhoes. I did that because I wanted to have a nice house and own an airplane, and I skydived on the weekend. And then as things get progressing, the skydiving industry grew and grew, and I was able to slowly transition out of the dirt work construction business up here in Washington, which is cold winters and all that. And I was able to turn it into whether it was training with military, some Hollywood stunts, special projects for Red Bull, demonstration skydives around the country. And I was able to just slowly make that transition into, I looked back the other day and I realized I've been doing this professionally now for like 20 years, just doing this. So pretty cool to be able to make a career doing what you love.
Yeah, definitely. And it's pretty, easy work. You just got to rely on gravity, right? So you just close your eyes and it all happens easily.
You travel across the country, you do all this planning and preparation, and you go do a jump, and the whole jump lasts like 3.5 minutes, right? So really all of the work goes into like 3.5 minutes and then it's over and you're off to the next one.
It's kind of, and this is obviously on a totally different scale, but that's always been my thought on skiing. Like skiing, it's fun, like the act of going down the hill, but the amount of, as Larry David said in Curb, like it's a schlep. Like the amount of work it takes to like get to the mountain and like go up the mountain and get all your gear on and everything, and then you go down and it's like few minutes. Same sort of thing, but I think yours is probably gets the heart rate a little bit higher. Your hobby.
Yeah, I mean, at base jumping is the same thing. It's so much work to get there. So I guess you got to enjoy the journey. You know, you climb up a mountain, you hike for 2.5 hours, and you get to the edge, and it takes 30 seconds to get down. Right. So I guess you got to enjoy the journey and the whole process of doing it.
So you are a member of the Red Bull Air Force, which is awesome. I think just like the coolest name ever, but obviously a really cool brand. I mean, I remember growing up and, my friends would, when YouTube started becoming a popular thing, they'd be like, dude, Red Bull has the coolest videos and like action athletes doing all sorts of things flying through the air. Had no idea at the time that, eventually you were one of those people. But how did Red Bull come into your life or you come into theirs?
So again, like everybody, right place, right time kind of scenario. I've been skydiving, competing at different level of, national and world championships for a while. My cousin Andy got on with Red Bull as a Red Bull skydiver also. And Andy was on for about a year before I was. And I was helping out once in a while. They would do a jump. They wouldn't have enough guys and they would have me come in and I would do a jump. And, you do a good job. By good job means you could land in one spot. You could actually communicate and talk to people. You weren't like, yeah, dude, bro, man. You could have like a real conversation with people. You slowly kind of got brought in. It's weird. You don't choose to become a Red Bull athlete, in my opinion. Red Bull chooses to have you an athlete. And in our world, especially the aviation and skydiving world, there's no better sponsor in the world than Red Bull. I mean, they help me do stuff that seems like insane and impossible. And it's all stuff I'd be out there trying to do on my own, but on a shoestring budget, and then I could take it to the next level when I have a company behind, helping make that happen. But a lot with Red Bull, to me, being a Red Bull skydiver, it's not just about your skill in the air and being able to do that. There's a lot of skydivers out there who have the ability to land in a perfect spot or do the perfect move in the air. But it's a lot about the whole package and being able to weigh decisions. And yes, it seems like we're always pushing the envelope and we're taking it to the edge. But at the end of the day, we have to make the decision whether to stand down or jump if the conditions aren't right. And sometimes you got to check your ego at the side, which is a really hard thing to do. So I think being a Red Bull athlete, it's a balance. You have to be like the full package, being able to, from communicate to have a good time, to push your sport to the next level, and also be credible in your sport. Red Bull, if you look at all their athletes, everyone who's a Red Bull athlete from whatever level they are, if they were the Shaun White snowboarders, to the Travis Pastrana's, in their sport, they are what people want to do. Well, there are what people want to be. And I think that that's key to becoming a Red Bull athlete.
And I love your impression of the, yeah, dude, bro, man, buttery. That was. You should just do this entire interview in that voice. I'd appreciate that. But no, Red Bull's super cool and amazing athletes like yourself. I want to first talk about something that was a Red Bull stunt or event, whatever you want to call it. That this one actually you weren't the one jumping or dropping, but you were kind of like the Wizard of Oz man behind the curtain orchestrating it, and that is Red Bull Stratus, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Felix Baumgartner. I remember when this happened, it took the world by storm and it was warranted. Literally, he was, I think, 125,000 plus feet in the air and dropped straight down. So you weren't the one that was actually the, quote unquote athlete in this, but what was your role in making that a reality and making it safe?
Yeah, I mean, Red Bull Stratos is one of the parts I'm most proud of in my career, for many reasons. What we accomplished, Felix jumped from 128,000 feet, right? The edge of space. What's really cool to me about that isn't so much the height. The height is awesome, but people are going to go higher. People are going to climb a ladder. They're going to jump from higher. It's just going to happen. But Felix was the first human being to break the speed of sound without a vehicle around him, right? Intentionally, just gravity pulled his body to the speed of sound. And that was an unsure thing. Like, we didn't know exactly. We thought we were pretty sure what was going to happen, but there were all of these theories about, the shock wave is going to tear him apart and this and that. And so to me, that is the crowning achievement of Red Bull Stratos. And for me personally, I learned on that project for 3.5 years. I designed the equipment he used to jump. I tested the equipment. I helped train Felix for the jump. I had about 250 jumps on all the equipment, testing and things not working and trying to get it right. What I learned on that project about myself and my ability to engineer things and to lead a team and to have my own team and big responsibilities. Before that, I was a little more of the, yo, bro, man, we're just skydiving, having a good time. And that project really opened it up. It put a bunch of responsibility on my shoulders. And it was very cool to learn that you could do a lot more than you expected. So my role in that was keeping Felix alive from his feet off the capsule to his feet on the ground.
Yeah, just 128,000 feet between that to worry about, so not too much. What was the biggest insight that you uncovered as part of that preparation that you're like, oh, this is actually key to making this happen smoothly?
Well, there was this concern, Colonel Kittinger, Joe Kittinger, who just passed away through this last year. He was a big inspiration to me my whole career. He was the guy in 1960 that jumped from 108,000 feet and was the first man to jump from that high. And he owned that for 50 years until Felix came along and was able to break it. Meeting Joe and hearing stories about everyone's concerned about this spin that might happen. When you're going supersonic, everybody thinks that your body's going to spin out of control. You need a drogue chute because that's what Colonel Kittinger had in 1960. What we ended up doing was we didn't use a drogue, but we had a drogue. And one thing that I'm most proud of on that is that I designed a device that he wore on his wrist that if he experienced a certain amount of G's, which was 3.5 G's for more than a continuous 6 seconds, meaning he was spinning so fast that for 6 seconds, he couldn't slow it down and couldn't control it, it would automatically fire and deploy a drogue chute that would help stabilize it, kind of a stabilization round little small parachute. My job was testing that parachute, designing the system that would make it deploy if need be, and figuring out in that, I didn't know how fast you would want it, what you'd want to trigger that. I just knew if you were spinning out of control, you would want something. And they said, well, if you were unconscious, it needs to be automatic. And I started thinking about how fast of a spin is too fast. Who knows? I mean, no one's ever done that before. So I built in the backyard a centrifuge. Basically, I took a rear end of a car. I buried half of the axle in concrete. I hooked it up to a tractor and it spun. I put a little table on the top of it and I laid on it and it spun me around. And we measured the G forces. And what I found out was that it wasn't, I thought like 10 G's, when you can't pull your hands in, that's when you'd want something to help you. What I found is it was more a duration, the amount of time. If you're spinning on a ride at a amusement park and you spin really fast for a couple seconds, it's no big deal. But if you spin medium fast for 6, 7, 8 seconds, you can no longer see the horizon. It starts to wobble. And if I can't tell what the horizon's doing, I don't know what my body needs to do to stop it. So coming up with those numbers was probably a very cool, and it was eye-opening. And they're numbers that are used today in other things based off of what we discovered.
So in addition to all your accomplishments, you've built the world's most safely sound and biggest centrifuge.
When I sent the picture to the team of what I built in my backyard and me spinning on it, and my cousin Andy's running the tractor and the toggle switch for the PTO stuck for a second, it spun me around so fast, my hat flew off, things went flying. They called me immediately, and I felt like I called into the principal's office saying, what are you doing? You're going to hurt yourself testing this stuff. But that's the only way I know how to do it, is to go out there and try stuff.
So speaking of going out and try stuff, let's get to your 25,000 foot jump without a parachute, which I talk about with all my guests. No, I'm just kidding. But I know that you got around 120 miles per hour free fall during that. This stunner event called Heaven Sent, and I think it's probably what you're most well known for now. First of all, thank you for hitting the net and landing safely, because I'm very excited for this interview, and it's really, really inspiring just to see someone like you kind of push the limits of what you think is possible. So just appreciate all you did there. But where did this crazy idea for jumping out of a plane from that high without a parachute come from?
People ask me all the time, how'd you come up with that? And I actually didn't come up with that. I worked with the Red Bull Stratos, and one of the guys, Chris Talley, one of the engineer type on the project, he reached out to me about a year or two after Stratos, a couple of years after Stratos, and he said, hey, I got this idea, and I want you to sign an NDA. And whenever I get a chance to sign a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, I sign them right away. I happily sign them. 99% of the time, you don't ever have anything to do with that project, but you get to hear about some really cool things going on in the world. So I signed it, and I sent it back to them, and we had a conference call. And I was outside. My son was very little at the time, and he's making a noise in the house. So I went outside. I'm in my truck, and I have this conference call. They said, "Hey, Luke, here's what we'd like you to do. We want you to jump out of a plane without a parachute." And I said, "Oh, thanks, but no thanks." A guy, Gary Connery, did that in Europe. He landed in some cardboard box with a wingsuit. Amazing. Very, very cool. Like 18,000 cardboard boxes on a hill. And I said, that was really cool, but it's not really for me. And he said, no wingsuit, no parachute. We're going to land. You're going to land on a giant slide. Imagine a half pipe, right? With the wall going up the side of a building. And you're going to come down that. You're going to match it. You're going to slide out on the half pipe and slide out the bottom. I laughed out loud a little bit for just a second. And I was like, whoa. And I started thinking, I'm like, you know what? I guess that's possible, but I don't know how you could test it. I don't know how you you can't drop something and have it hit in the sweet spot every time. And I couldn't figure out how you could test that. And the feasibility of making a slide that big, it didn't seem very practical to me. So I said, you know what? I'm not your guy. I got a wife and a son, and I want to be around for a long time. So, but I'd love to help you guys find somebody to do it. I'd love to help you find somebody. And go away. 2 weeks go by. I start thinking more and more. It's just always thinking about it. And I thought to myself, if someone put a gun to my head, Luke, and said, you have to jump out of a plane without a parachute, how would you do it? I started thinking about, what about a net? The guy in the circus that shoots out of the cannon and flops into a net. I'm like, I wonder if you could do that. So we start designing this little system. I call him up after I talk to my wife, and I say, I think we could do this. Here's how we do it. I need to get paid not to jump. You need to get paid before you jump. You need to get paid just to develop the system, not just that. You can't have money on your mind when you're trying to do something and push the envelope. And I get to pick my team. They said, great, let's do it. So Chris Talley's idea, we start moving, and we make it happen. So originally I turned it down. Even someone like me sometimes thinks stuff's a little too out there.
That's a good one. That's pretty out there. This net you mentioned was 100 by 100 square feet, which is a huge net. I mean, I've never seen a net that big. Even NBA hoops that are pretty tall. No, but from 25,000 feet up, 1,000 square foot net, if I did that math right, it feels kind of like a needle in a haystack situation. Like that net feels tiny from that far, and obviously you can navigate to an extent to make sure you're aiming right. But for someone who's not quite familiar with like all the ins and outs of skydiving, what is the way that you were able to, for the most part, guarantee that you'd be able to hit this net and land in this net safely?
First, the net was 100 feet by 100 feet. So it gives you 10,000 square feet. So it's small from that high. I mean, it's like
I knew I messed up that math somewhere along the way.
It's like a small warehouse thing. But what you do is, like, when you're flying in your airplane, you can't see your house. When you're flying in a commercial airliner and you're going into, let's say, wherever you live, if I'm coming in, I can't see my house, but I can see the town I live in, right? From that high, I could see the freeways. And then as you get lower, you can start to pay, okay, that's Safeway. Okay, that's my house right there. So it's the same thing with this. When I exited, we opened the door about almost a mile short as we're flying towards it at 25,000 feet. We open up the door. I looked down to make sure that I could at least see the area, right? You could see a whole bunch of cars parked and the setup, and it was out in the middle of nowhere. So it was the only thing in these foothills. So it was very easy to see that way. And honestly, when you step off, you could just see the general area. You know where you're going, but you can't see the lines on the road, right? But you can see a road. And as you get closer, the lines start to appear. And that's exactly how it worked with my jump. But in order to line up was the hardest thing. So imagine you're swimming across a river. You have to angle your body and swim upstream a little bit in order to go straight across the river, right? So the air currents are like rivers in the air, right? The air is blowing different directions. So sometimes I had my body position angled where I was moving forward through the air, 30 miles an hour through the air, but I wasn't moving across the ground at all. It would be like the river changing directions and speeds a couple times as you're trying to swim across it. So you make those fine adjustments. I had a light system that we use on airplanes, a PAPI light system with some lenses in them. Basically, if you stand on one side of the light, it's red. You stand on the other side of the light, it's white. I use those to help guide me down there. And I honestly did a ton of practice jumps, opening my parachute super low, below 1,000 feet over the top of the net, until I felt confident. My wife and I we do it 75 times in a row, opening over the center of the net below 1,000 feet before we would try to do this. And by the time we did it for real, we did 82 times in a row. And I don't think you can crinkle a piece of paper and throw it in the garbage can next to you 82 times in a row. So at that point, I figured we were at 100%. We weren't 90%. We were 100% success rate by the time we were ready to go.
I would probably miss that garbage can 81 out of those 82 times. Was there anything different about that jump from like obviously from a safety standpoint, you don't have the parachute, but like, was there any other protocols that you put in place just to help save your life in any possible realm if anything went wrong?
Honestly, once you stepped out of the aircraft that day, there were no safety, there was no backup. You were 100% committed, and there's a little bit of freedom in that. You know, if you have let's say you have a little backup parachute or something, you'd have to decide to use that so much higher above the net that you wouldn't be committed to it, right? If you have no options but to do something and there's no backup plan, there's no anything, your focus is solely on doing that and accomplishing that goal. So in the moment from exiting the aircraft to landing in the net, there was nothing, no backup, no nothing.
You have, I would say, the most unique resume of any guest in Wild Business Growth podcast history. What else in your career besides, helping out with Stratos, Heaven Sent, what else, when you look back, can you point to and you're like, oh man, that was really cool, I got to do that?
I think my first adventure in working in the movie industry, right? Iron Man 3. If you watch Iron Man 3, we got sucked out of Air Force One, a bunch of us skydivers, and we got sucked out. We're dressed as business suits and reporters and stuff. And I'm the last guy that Iron Man rescues right before he hits the water in Iron Man 3. And that was really, really cool to get to see how movies are made, right? And be part of the movie magic and such a iconic Iron Man type of thing, right? That was a really neat moment. As far as for my sport goes and for the things I've done, I would love for at the end of this career for it to be, it's not going to be known for one thing. It's not going to be like, hey, he's the guy who did the no parachute jump. That is probably the most famous thing that I have done. And it's by far the riskiest thing I've done and will ever do.
I mean, people do that all the time, right? No.
I want to have a body of work that people look back and are just like any one of those things, from running the TV productions for a wingsuit race with a bunch of helicopters in the air and guys racing between pylons, the plane swap, doing like all the things. And then the couple things I haven't done yet that are on my bucket list to finish before I'm done with this.
Ooh, is there anything that you can reveal from the bucket list, or is that top secret information?
No, I'm not quite ready yet. We're still working on a couple of those, but then I'll let you know when we're ready.
I never get a chance to say this, so I'm just going to say it. If Luke can jump out of an airplane 20,000 times, you can sign up for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter one time. Think about it. I know the chain of incredibly corny newsletter segues continues, but if you want a short and sweet email from me every Thursday that includes entrepreneurship tips, podcasting tips, and the worst jokes on the planet, all you have to do is sign up at maxpodcasting.com/newsletter. That is the Podcasting to the Max newsletter. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's get to your wild listener questions for Luke. The wild listeners have put together a list of rapid fire questions for you that is basically I posed this on social media and posed the question, hey, interviewing someone really, really cool for the podcast who has skydived over 21,000 times, which what is the latest number? Is that the most accurate number?
It's a little more than that probably at this point, but I like to say a lower number. That way no one can give you a hard time.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because for sure there's haters out there.
Yeah.
So I'll pick a number. I've been jumping since I was 16 and I'm 49 now. So I could easily say that I have 20,000 skydives.
Perfect. All right. So I'm interviewing someone who has skydived twice. And here, no, I'm just kidding. I asked, what would you ask him? It was a really interesting mix of questions, some serious, some more kind of disbelief of like, okay, yeah, there's nobody out there that skydived that much. So I'm going to rattle them off here. Totally up to you how philosophical or tongue-in-cheek you want to get with your answers.
Let's hear it. I like them all.
The first one is from Brendan O'Mara, who asks, how many bugs have you swallowed in your lifetime?
Believe it or not, I've not got a bug in under parachute ever before. Motorcycle stuff, but no bugs. They're up. I think we're up too high for bugs, but that's pretty funny.
It makes you think how high bugs go up, but yeah,
Yeah, I
that
didn't
way
think of it till they just asked that question. Actually,
you're gonna keep your mouth closed on the next dives. Then I'm sure. This one's from Sue Poli. What was the closest you ever came during a dive to something bad happening, and how did you get yourself mentally to go back out there after a scare like that?
that's a great question. When shortly after the no parachute jump, I did that jump, and you had so much focus and so much training on doing that. That was, you think that would be the scariest moment of your skydiving career? A couple people told me, a stuntman told me, and then a Navy SEAL admiral also sent me letters saying, like, hey, there's this giant letdown after you work so hard on a project, and it's written. There's some books written by some Olympic gold medalists that spent their whole life, and they win their gold medal, and then they're like, now what? And the stuntman Tim Rigby told me, he goes, hey, you know what? You got to be extra careful now because you did something that required all of this focus. And now you're going to go out and do normal skydiving, which requires all of your focus, but you're going to feel and I kind of poo-pooed it and I kind of went on. We were in Tijuana doing a jump for Red Bull at night into a stadium. I jumped out. It was raining. We were low. I jumped out. I pulled my parachute. My pilot chute got tangled up around some live air to ground wire system because it was broadcasting to the stadium. I didn't take it so serious. It was hooked up. I was trying to untangle it while I was falling. And at some point it dawned on me in that moment, as that parachute was tangled up around me, that you have to pull your reserve parachute no matter what. And I had found that being complacent is what put me in a position that a normal little jump should have been no big deal. Landing in a stadium at night, I mean, do that hundreds of times. And I was distracted because I had just done something that I thought, if that didn't kill me, nothing can. And so I would say that was my most dangerous time in skydiving, was after the no parachute jump.
And this one I think is more in the realm of disbelief of like, wait, okay, there's nobody that's actually skydived this much. Olivia Campanella asks, why? As in, why would you jump out of a plane over 20,000 times? What drives you?
I wish there was a philosophy, like this big answer that, made everybody feel good. I love it. I mean, I don't have this big emotional feeling, and it's not a spiritual moment for me. It's just the thing that makes me the happiest. And I love it. That's the only answer I have for that.
In a similar vein, Cam McCougler asks if you are aware that planes actually have landing gear.
They do. I did not know that. No, that's really funny. For the long time, I had jumped out of a helicopter but never landed in one. I've jumped out of this type of plane but never landed in one. So, that's pretty interesting. And then over this last year, I did a jump where two planes diving at the ground. I took off in one. So I took off in one airplane and I jumped out and I flew over and I got in the second airplane and I landed the second plane. So I've actually maybe the only person who's taken off one airplane by himself and landed in another one by himself, which is so I do know they have landing gear. I just try not to use them.
Probably some Mission Impossible movie. Tom Cruise has done that too, with a little bit of help. But all right, two more quick ones. This one is just something I was super curious about. So this is from me. Thank you, Max. What is your pre-skydive ritual?
It really depends on what type of jump I'm doing. And it sounds funny, but if I'm doing a normal jump at a regular skydiving center, it's yee-hawing, high-fiving your buddies and stuff. If it's one that requires some focus, I find myself just before I jump going through the whole jump in my head. Just thinking about, exit, what I'm doing, where my hands are going, what I'm doing. And I visualize that all the way through landing, touching down and walking back off of the field or the landing area. And that seems to complete that circle. And then I'm ready to go do my work. I was told it was some form of meditation, and I said no because I don't meditate. So
that's amazing. That's I think Jimmy Valvano was the one who made all his players visualize that they won the championship and practice cutting down the nets.
When I did the no parachute jump, I worked with the sports psychiatrist Mike Gervais and psychologist.
You could say whatever you want.
Yeah, and Mike is incredible. He works with all these Olympic athletes and NFL teams and all this stuff. And he helped me learn that to visualize not just touching the net, but what happens after? And it took a long time to get to the point where I could, everything, all my focus was till I touched the net. And then eventually I got to the point where I was walking off and I was going home afterwards and I was unpacking, and that put everything at ease and made it like completed the thing full circle. So I can totally understand that.
And finally, this guy who submitted this has a reputation and a nickname. So totally up to you if you want to answer it or not. Danny Schneider, who goes by the Big D, asks, given that you've spent so much time in the air, are you a member of the Mile High Club?
Yes, I am.
There we go. All right, perfect. I'm going to edit this podcast down to just 10 seconds, and that was it. Perfect. Awesome. Well, Luke, this has been an absolute blast, and just find you and your story and all you do so inspiring and fascinating and motivating, and I'm sure there's endless people out there that look up to you as well. So thanks so much for coming on. Where is the best place for somebody to connect with you online if they want to check out some of your videos or just connect with you in any way?
Really, it's at Luke Aikins on Instagram is probably the best, easiest way to do it these days now. Everybody's out there doing it once we post all the cool stuff we do.
Awesome. Perfect. And then last thing, final thoughts, the stage is yours. It could be a quote, kind of words to live by, words to skydive by, whatever you want, send us home here.
I'm out here, I do all these crazy and wild things where you're jumping out of planes without a parachute, you're flying between planes, you're wing sitting down mountains, you're doing all of that stuff. I choose to look at it, people say you're this daredevil, you don't care if you live or die. And that kind of bothers me a little bit when people say that, because I look at what I'm doing is I'm out there living life to the fullest. We go into these things with our eyes wide open. I'm a family. I have a son and a wife, and you don't have to be this crazy wild guy to be out here doing these things. And if you calculate things out and you mitigate risk down to what's acceptable to you, everybody's risk is different. Yours is different than mine. And we're all out there, trying to find our way and doing our thing. And for me, this is what makes me who I am and what I do. And I just love sharing it with everybody. That's kind of my passion, is everybody gets to kind of see what's possible, whether you're a kid, and you're struggling in school, or you're a guy deciding whether I'm going to switch to a new job or not. You calculate that risk and then you make the leap. I just think that's such a good lesson for people to learn. And I literally am taking the leap every day.
And wild is the word of the day yet again. Luke, thank you so much for sharing your story, all the behind the scenes, all the ins and outs details. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode and for submitting those awesome and wild questions. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite podcast app and tell a friend about the podcast. And then check out all the videos of Luke's jumps and stunts, and you will lose hours on hours. Yeah, he's a man. You can also find us on Good Pods, where there are very cool podcasts and podcast recommendations. Very cool. And for any help with podcast production, you can learn more at maxpodcasting.com. And sign up for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter. That is at maxpodcasting.com/newsletter. Until next dive, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!